Welcome back, you guys. This is going to be the 4th episode of our podcast now. We're starting to rack up the numbers. So yeah, how you doing today, Jake?
I'm doing fantastic. I was with my family all day, had a barbecue.
Nice.
Yeah.
I actually saw my family today, too. I hope that everyone watching is doing well.
Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Yes, that is today. Happy Cinco de Mayo. So for today's episode, we're going to talk about climate change, pretty much. We think it's a pretty pressing issue for our generation and a lot of people.
Future generations.
That as well. Yeah, future generations.
Yeah.
So, all right. I'll go ahead and start us off with what is climate change, aka global warming. So, for those of you that don't know, it's basically this thing called CO2 that gets trapped in Earth's atmosphere and will retain heat. And since human beings have been increasing in population, I don't have the exact date down, but it's something like 1976-ish, the amount of carbon, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has gone up by 400%. And so, you can also kind of attribute that in part to the sun, because the sun also gives CO2 emissions as it burns off energy. But the sun has been cooling instead.
Wait, hold up. Your terminology here, it's not actually from the sun. The sun's just heating things on Earth.
The Earth's atmosphere heating and carbon emissions going into the atmosphere both heat Earth's atmosphere.
Oh, like it traps the heat in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so normally the sun puts forth some of the heat in the atmosphere. Since the date of like 1976, the sun has by an incredibly small degree cooled to some amount. And
sun?
Yeah.
Like the sun.
The sun.
The sun itself is cooler.
Yeah. And you might be attributing that.
I had never heard that before.
You either could attribute that to our path around it might be getting larger, or it might be deviating, and or the sun is expending. It has only so much energy. Granted, it's for billions and billions and billions of years, but it is going to burn out eventually. And so the amount of degree is so small that it's barely recordable from the points that these were taken around 1975, 76 to today. However, the CO2 emissions I'm kind of mixing the two. I need to kind of clearly differentiate. The atmosphere is still heating by 400%. So it's largely assumed that it's human interaction.
Yeah.
And CO2 is measured to go up from things like coal plants and natural gas and whatnot, as well as just the things that we do every day, using electricity and driving around in cars. It all, at some point in the chain, will produce CO2 emissions somehow. And the more energy that we use, typically the more emissions are going to be spent and sent into the atmosphere. So that's pretty much how it works, is that the atmosphere is warming up gradually. And why does that matter? It's not exactly that things are getting hotter. It's more that the climate of Earth itself is changing and getting hotter, which has different effects on the environment.
Why is that a problem?
Because things like the polar ice caps melting harms not only the environment for those animals, but also causes disasters to other environments and biomes.
Specifically, our environment and our biome.
Exactly.
Louisiana.
And then you look at other areas of the world, like the Sahara, which is growing to be increasingly hotter instead, and which is killing a lot of the life that lives there. And you wouldn't think about it, but at some point, everything having to do with ecosystems is about that it's a system and that it's connected. So if one species is suffering because of the heat increasing, it eventually gets down to a point where it affects humanity in some way. The example that I pulled was about how lions are decreasing in population because the heat in the savannah is growing so high that they can't naturally sweat, and it's a problem for them that they can't really handle. Then the animals that they hunt are growing larger in number, eating all the grass, and the animals that we use can't eat that grass. And so it all eventually affects each other and gets to humans one way or another, all back around the system. So obviously, I think global warming is bad, and nobody's really given it the time of day until now. I mean, you see Lil Dicky's song about Earth, you see all these new Planet Earth documentaries, and that stuff's been there before, but I think today it's starting to grow in popularity because our timeline for how many fossil fuels we have left, things like natural gas and coal, are running out. So let's move on to like how, by the way, all that stuff I got from Committee on Climate Change, and I'm going to have the different organizations and their articles in the description.
So that was just the CO2 and the sun and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the next two I have are from an organization called the Union of Concerned Scientists, and they are global, but I pulled from their like U.S. division, their articles about the U.S. And so the first thing that I looked up was how can like everyday people, you and me, reduce global warming, reduce what's called our carbon footprint. So how much CO2 are we personally expending? Basically, once again, I said that it's generating almost everything that we do at some point. Everything that we use for electricity eventually gets back to how are we getting that electricity, and using that electricity more efficiently is what's going to expand how long we have in terms of our carbon footprint and shrink it out over a longer period of time. As well as things like, cars are the obvious one. Cars are the most polluting one. They use natural gas directly, or maybe not directly, but like it goes
Fossil
from
fuels.
it shifts in form, but we use it, and then
Yeah.
it's expelled through exhaust into pollution into
And not only the
air.
gas that runs the car, but also the oil and the car parts itself are, a lot of them are hard to dispose of
Yeah,
and aren't easy to recycle.
yeah.
So,
So the idea of reducing your carbon footprint kind of all centers around reducing the amount of electricity you use and working with the environment as much as possible. So one example, which was pretty broad that they gave me, was more efficient appliances. So if you have the option to get like a microwave or a toaster or something like that, even light bulbs, like the regular round light bulbs will use up and waste much more energy than the fluorescent ones that curl up or whatever.
can I interject something?
Sure, go ahead.
We only have one light on in this room.
Yeah. It's a good example of like
Yeah, we're
being
doing our
able to-
part.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
did my part.
Yeah. So just being able to be more efficient with the amount of electricity you're using, which kind of falls into the next thing, is like using as little electricity as possible. So if you're not in your house, you turn off the lights. If you're not using something, you should try and turn it off or make an effort to use as little as possible.
It'll also save on your electricity bill, which
Yeah.
you are directly affected by.
Exactly. It helps out in multiple ways, which gets into solar in a bit when I get to the overarching bit. So driving as little as possible is another one. I know that you and me have the opportunity to walk or bike to class every day, which is great, but not everyone has that. Basically, a lot of these have to do with try and position yourself to be able to do these. So walking to work every day if you can, or taking like a bus to save on gas, stuff like that. Drinking tap water instead of bottled water is another big one.
Oh, huge.
Yeah, that one's huge.
Huge right there.
For those of you that don't know,
This episode's sponsored by tap water.
Plastic is actually made from crude oil. And plastic is one of the biggest polluters that we have in the modern day today. We throw plastic out into the ocean like it's nobody's business.
Just look around. It's
in
plastic,
everything you have.
plastic,
It's in
plastic,
everything you
plastic,
have.
Plastic here, plastic, the phone case,
Yeah.
all of it.
And
Yeah.
so while we have so much plastic, a lot of that we don't use goes to waste. And plastic doesn't break down the same as something like paper does. It's a much denser compound, and you get developed what's called microplastics. And microplastics themselves Basically, they are tiny little fragmented compounds of plastic that are the core elements that they were made, like that they were manually made into during the whole crude oil process. There's different types. There's like 7 different types, but there's a bunch of them that not only cause diseases to people, but also animals, and end up in everything that we have. Something like 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 adults have what's called BPA plastic in them, which causes multiple different types of cancers if it's found in enough number. It's so small, but it's present everywhere because we use so much plastic. And some plastics can be broken down and some plastics can't. And so if you can recycle, you should, because recycling is the only real way to get some of those plastics that we can redo and reuse to make sure it's more efficient and that it doesn't harm as much as it is currently. And there's still a lot of research to be done on plastic and what we can do to fix it, because it's man-made, and so we don't really know how to deconstruct it the way, and nature doesn't know either. So it's going to take effort and time, but plastic itself is another conversation as in terms of just general pollution and global warming. All of that stuff is using electricity, using natural gases, and using putting carbon into the atmosphere, which is bad. So the last part is basically that I have written up by the other article I read from Union of Concerned Scientists. It's more macro level over, like, I focus on the United States, but it applies to other countries. How do we fix the whole energy problem? If natural gas and coal is causing all of this stuff, how do we hit it from the source? And basically what it boils down to is people have done studies. The one I read basically said that the U.S. today has a plan and capability to power 80% of the country with renewable resources. But to do that, it's going to take a lot of infrastructural and power grid transmissions and upgrading to be able to do that. And how do you get that done is through policy. So people voting and advocating for this to happen is the only real way to get that started, get the ball rolling on that. And while I think people are tending towards that, I couldn't find a specific thing for our viewers or for us to go to before we did this. But if there is one, definitely hit it up. I just don't have it on me. I'm going to look out, though. If I find one, I'll try and make an update on it. As for some more general points, natural gas in our economy is generally more expensive than using a renewable resource. Things like filling up your car with gas, it would be more expensive than charging it with electricity. And it's also much more difficult to acquire, which makes it more expensive. The fossil fuels that are available today, there's only so much in the U.S., and if the U.S. wants more, they've got to go to other countries like in the Middle East.
For fossil fuels?
Yeah, for fossil fuels, which only makes them more expensive.
The tide is turning in that area, actually, because of fracking, the technology changes that have happened. Midland, Texas is actually producing more natural gas than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
Well, okay, not more than anywhere else in the world, but more than Iraq.
Right.
Which is
that's a lot.
That's
that
a
is
benchmark.
a lot.
So
but
if
are they
you
using
get above
fracking
that,
to do it?
Yeah.
So fracking itself is really detrimental to the ecosystem.
I'm just saying, the United States is doing that here rather than going overseas. That's the
good.
tide is changing that way because of the regulations that have been lifted in tandem with technology improvements that have allowed them to find the oil and then blow it up and then suck it out and all that. Yeah.
Well, that's good in terms of economy.
Yeah,
but
it's great in terms of economy, but
if the goal is to help the environment, it's worse. It's detrimentally worse. Fracking has a worse effect on the environment. As they pull out, have I explained this to you? I'll explain it for the viewers in case I haven't.
Explain it.
As they pull out the natural gas that's locked up in the soil and the deep ground, basically, they put water down to fill in the cracks, and when they pull the water out, the natural gas comes with it. And so they refill those cracks so that the ground isn't ruptured. They refill it with a chemical compound that's supposed to hold the dirt together. But that chemical compound is capable of expanding and moving the dirt, which can hit buildings and the place where we might store our water for those buildings, and it causes, which would get into our food system and into general animals. And if that happens, and that causes diseases far worse than if the oil was to get in there. At least maybe that might be incorrect, but it would still cause a lot of damage.
Well, oil in the underwater natural springs that every water tower you see, the water isn't shipped in on a train or a truck. It's pulled out of the ground. Yeah.
And so if the natural gas that we want, that we're pulling out of the ground, is destroying the environment, it's like the whole cutting your nose off to spite your face analogy, as in, like, we don't want to harm ourselves to keep doing things the way we've done. That's my opinion. I think it's kind of a controversial thing in terms of fracking, and you could probably do a whole episode on it. But yeah, I'll finish up with the whole model of 80% renewable energy is kind of a combination of all of the different types of renewable resources in the strongest areas of the states. So you've got wind energy in our highest mountains and solar in our deserts, geothermal, biofuel, hydroelectric. There's still R&D research being done on potentially hydrogen energy, which is what the sun uses for thermonuclear. It burns hydrogen. And so if we could somehow pull hydrogen out of the water, the most abundant resource on Earth, then that could almost definitely fix the problem.
Well, if we could pull fresh drinking water out of the ocean more efficiently, that alone would be great.
Exactly.
Pulling the hydrogen out might be a little harder.
Exactly. The fresh water might be the primary concern.
Yeah.
And some nuclear as well. A lot of smaller countries today use a combination of nuclear and renewable energy. This vastly reduces their carbon footprint and powers everything effectively. There are some concerns about the nuclear effects, about, plants and the effect on the environment, because nuclear still does emit CO2 emissions. It's just far less.
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect fix, but it's
the
not.
Pollution is, we know where the pollution is with uranium. You can't get rid of
the nuclear waste.
It's impossible to get rid of it. It's very hard to store. But
you have to wait until it expires.
If you know where it is. You can put it in a box and put it in a mountain and say that's the mountain that has the pollution, rather than it being in all of the air and the water and the animals and the trees.
Yeah. And that idea of putting it somewhere is nobody knows where to put it.
Yeah,
And if we're filling all these areas with renewable resources, where are we going to put the nuclear waste?
We just... If some city needs to bite the bullet and say,
if the solar panels are occupying all of the desert, we can't put the nuclear waste in the desert.
We could.
And then destroy our solar panels, likely.
I don't know if it would... okay, so...
Fair enough. I don't know enough, but the assumption would be that it would have an effect, right?
To be honest, we don't know the technical requirements to do, we don't know how to build a nuclear reactor. We don't know how to
that information
build a solar panel.
Yeah.
So we don't know the technical specifics of all this, but as voters, the question is, do you want to vote for a party that is gonna boost the economy and makes everybody's lives more comfortable, or do you want to vote for a party that is going to at least try to save things for the future generation?
Yeah.
That's about as specific we can get.
And so that's where I end on, is the idea of voting for the right politicians and the right parties to be able to enact policies about helping our environment.
Yeah.
Because 80% renewable future basically means 80% less CO2 emissions on a whole, roughly, and 50% less water that's being used on our current energy acquisition. So yeah, that's everything from me.
Cool. Yeah, we're 19 minutes in now.
Sorry.
It's fine. Because mine's just kind of gonna blend into the end part. Because I kind of want some back and forth on.
All right. Well, go ahead. Point. What have you looked up?
So, What I have is essentially a discussion on the human problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, human is the problem here, because each person is consuming a certain amount, and there's a certain amount of people, and so when you multiply that up, you get the total amount of resources that we're consuming.
Yeah.
And then there's another factor, efficiency, and then so that's my spiel. Is just on that, like that question of what do we want to do moving forward? How do we want to solve the human problem? So bring it back to political parties, because that's like the easy framework, I guess, to talk about global warming is in that sphere. So the Republicans have tended to say, let's pull back regulations, let's boost the economy, let's let the companies do whatever the hell they want to do to the environment in order to employ more people. And I mean, everybody's quality of life goes up whenever the economy does well, except for a minority. I mean, on the whole, that's what happens. Everybody has more stuff, and companies are making more stuff. Companies are making more money. They're paying more. They're hiring more people getting raises, promotions. They're building more facilities. All that stuff happens with the Republican Party. Then you switch and you look at the Democrats, and the Green New Deal is probably the most extreme way you can go for climate change bills that have come up recently. I mean, that's the one that comes to mind. And it was we need that bill says we are going to directly reduce the quality of life for people so that we can protect the environment. I mean, the companies get hurt. I mean, the plane companies would get just decimated because they wanted to get rid of planes.
Yeah.
And get rid of cars, and I mean, make it to where everything was electric. All was, oil and gas companies done, just all renewable. So when you go that way and you say we need to protect the environment, the converse of that is we need to reduce the amount of that humans use, which means we either need to, each person on average needs to consume less, or we need to have less people. I mean, how else are you going to reduce how much everybody's using? So capitalism puts a reduction on how much people consume. Only rich people are allowed to consume however much they want. And even then it's limited to how much money they have. And then the poorest of people are severely limited in how much that they can have. And then the government comes in and says, okay, we're not going to let these people just die on the streets, and we're going to set some baselines to where there's a floor for how much that you can consume. And the ceiling is just only some people are rich. So when it comes to protecting the environment, the richer we get, the more we consume, and we're gonna we're just gonna tear this planet apart. And the companies are gonna do it, and the people are gonna blame the companies, but really the people need to blame themselves. It's each person's responsibility to think about what is their footprint that they're leaving. And then on the whole, the government's job is to say, I mean, what decisions do we have to make right now in order to protect future generations? So what would you say? Do you want to reduce consumption or reduce population? Personal Jack Lopo opinion.
Well, I mean, there really isn't a way to reduce population.
I mean, over time, you just set a limit on how many kids can be born.
But that is not...
That's not okay with you?
No. That's what China did, and I don't think anyone has a positive opinion on that policy idea. But to converse that, I'll say that as we get more educated and advanced, people don't need to have as many children. It's not the fact that we're consuming so much that we, are breeding like rabbits. There's no limit. That's what animals do. But as we become more educated and become have a higher quality of life, there's no need to have extra children.
Right.
You have the kids you want, and then you stop. And so more and more people aren't having kids and are having, one kid. And that's fine. If you want to have a lot of kids, that's fine. Unless there's a very drastic imminent problem, I don't think that global warming is the imminent problem for population.
I'm saying population in the world, 7 billion?
Yeah. It's about 7.4, I think. No, it's probably like 7.1.
No, let's look it up.
It's like 7.1, I think.
With my phone. 7.53 billion. When we were kids, it was 6, right?
Yeah, it was 6 whenever we were in middle school. That's a lot.
This is a problem. This might
agree.
be worse than the CO2. Actually, this is why the CO2 is happening, because how do you feed and you keep this many people comfortable? And so if you say everybody deserves a certain quality of life, we need to put a limit on people.
I mean,
or we put a limit on consumption, and we say the average person cannot consume more than this, and that means everything has to get more expensive. Or, we could do communism. That's always an option.
No. So...
No. And both of us are, no, that's not happening.
Here's what I'm thinking, is that global warming is
I just want to say this. 50 years ago would have been...
yeah, we've doubled since then.
We've doubled in the past 50 years.
It was about 3.5 billion.
3.5
more than
billion in 1969, which was 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So... the idea of a timetable, I think, is what everyone's mind is on. We only have so much time before we hit the limit.
People are living longer too. It's another thing.
Yeah. So we only have so much time before we hit the limit of, we have too many people and the planet's going to be ruined. And so your two ideas of reduce consumption or reduce population, I think about it as in that limit isn't set. We've been raising that limit throughout history, and we can continue to raise
raising what limit?
The limit of how many people Earth can support and we ourselves can support.
Because that's the efficiency element.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's where it gets to this. So this was my first point. So my first point is if we can keep innovating, we can keep figuring out how to consume the same amount, like everybody, the whole world. We can use less resources and have the same quality of life if we keep innovating. Do you think at some point we won't be able to innovate fast enough to support 10 billion? Okay, give it 50 more years. You think we're going to double again? You think we'll be at 14 billion?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Maybe. I just don't know.
Why shouldn't we? What is going to stop this? It's just it's a gamble to say that the quality of okay, how do I say this? In order to get everybody to okay, hold on 1 second. Okay. People get richer. People have better quality of life. Air conditioning, running water, da-da-da-da-da. They have less kids. But do they have enough less kids? Are they going to have 3 kids, per woman? Is it going to be 2, 1? Because if the population growth is less than, 1, then that means that you have negative. It's like over the years you're going to actually lose people. You're going to have less people total. So will it get that low, or are we going to keep gaining, but it's just going to be less gain? It's like that's a huge gamble trying to figure out what's going to happen with that. Is that going to work? Having everybody have a better quality of life so that they have less kids, and also, what will that cost? What are we going to have to do in order to get everybody to that level? Is it communism?
No, we're not gonna. You've been going back to communism a lot.
That's what I'm saying. We need the average person to get to that level. It's all about what is the average of all these people doing. When we're talking about the planet discussion with carbon emissions and things like that.
Well, carbon emissions, that's just the first problem. So let's just focus on that. The idea of renewable energy is possible. Like I think it's foreseeable in the future, and it's just going to take people working towards it and reducing. And as for the idea of those two things influencing it, of consumption and population, those have a history of balancing out. There's a pattern that all countries have been following, and
there's a pattern that nature has been following for the past million years that's now different.
Yes, but I'm trying to think. So think about the UK.
Okay.
All right, so go way back in terms of like sticks and stones, and then going forward into Renaissance, and population starts to boom. And at the time, there wasn't anything to stop it, so plague came in, and that was really bad. And then after Renaissance, you've got, people are starting to learn how to think philosophically, and then industrial, where power becomes a thing. There's massive pollution. But everyone's quality of life has been upgraded. So we've sacrificed the earth to up our quality of life.
Yeah.
And population is still booming.
We've always done that.
And now we're at a phase where we can no longer sacrifice the earth, but we have potentials to pursue to where we can have it both ways. Where we can have our energy and our quality of life provided by the things the earth is provided by, and also have our population continue to grow. And at the end of the day, this is the conversation about earth, but, not to get too meta, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. If the population doubles, who's to say that half of it isn't on another planet, if you really want to go there and get crazy?
I'm just trying to say that CO2 emissions have gone up by 400% since 1976.
Roughly 1976. I might have to check the date. The date might be wrong, but I'll have the article in there.
Population has gone up by 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So that means it's four
times
a factor
the
of
amount.
4.
Yeah.
So for every population growth, we have 4 times as much CO2 growth.
Mm-hmm. I don't think CO2 is
because
inherently
not
tied to
only
consumption.
not only is population going up, but quality of life is going up.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the factor of 4 is coming in. Not,
Yeah.
It's not like everybody's maintaining the same quality of life, because then it would be 100 up, 100 up.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody was doing the same thing, but just scale it up directly to the population. But it's because if we just maintained with 7.5 billion people right now, that CO2 number is going to keep going up.
Yeah, I agree.
Like way up.
The idea that CO2 is correlated to consumption is something that I think doesn't need to be a thing. Like, we need to decorrelate those and start to reduce CO2 while being able to maintain where we're at right now, and then potentially go further. And there might be other problems along the way.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's the most pressing one.
That's the question of the innovation.
Right.
We would switch from CO2 to something
different.
better.
Or, like I said earlier, a combination of all the, I would say, primitive ones that we've got now.
Do you remember when, in history class, when we talked about Rockefeller and the robber barons?
No, but continue.
You don't remember that?
No, I don't remember it at all.
It was the 1890s. Civil War was like 30 years before that.
Yeah.
And the United States was kind of doing that whole like Spanish-American War stuff. This was all around the same time. And that's when, like, they didn't use gasoline in Civil War. Mm-hmm. But in World War I they did. Mm-hmm. So this was whenever that innovation happened. Whenever combustion and all the trains used it, cars used it. So Henry Ford, Vanderbilt, and Rockefeller were those were the 3 of the biggest ones. There was also, I think, J.P. Morgan was one too. But anyways, they were all making big bucks on gas. Like, that was huge because it was so much better than anything else that they had at the time. But we're not seeing that with renewable resources. We're actually seeing renewable resources being less efficient than gas. And so what I'm saying is, Yeah, I mean, they'd be better for the environment. That's true, but if we're going to use those instead of gas, we're going to have to consume less because they aren't as good as gas when it comes to producing energy. They just aren't more efficient, because if they were more efficient, people would be making like ridiculous amounts of money off of it.
Well, why don't you think they're more efficient?
They're just not. I mean, when you think about the cost of having an electric car versus a gas car, it costs just a lot more to get that battery built and to build all the other things. And it's going to take a while for us to figure out how to build an electric car that is, renewable and all this stuff and cheaper than a gas car. And then on top of it, the battery itself. You have to dispose of that battery. Batteries aren't recyclable.
Here's what I'll say, is that in 18 whatever, oil was the biggest thing that powered the United States. Mm-hmm. How much time and energy do you think has been put into improving coal and oil and whatnot? How much time and energy do you think has been spent improving renewables?
A lot.
Okay, I would disagree, because we discovered oil and natural gas and coal much earlier than being able to use renewable energy.
Right.
And there's been more time and effort put into refining those than the other side. And so...
This brings me to my other point.
Okay, go ahead.
People think that, this is big.
Okay, go ahead.
If we put more money into this stuff, it'll be able to improve more, made more efficient, and then we'll be able to make money off of it.
Exactly.
There's these things called eco bonds.
What's an eco bond?
So an eco bond is you buy it, and do you know how bonds work?
To a degree. It's basically a legal promise to pay someone back, right?
Yeah, and so they'll pay you
plus interest.
Yeah. So if you buy a $2,500 bond, they'll pay you $500 back for 6 months.
Okay.
There's that extra month, and that's how you get your cut. Okay. That's a really good bond if you can get something like that. But anyways, yeah. That's how these work. You buy an eco bond because you're saying that money, you're going to be able to make money back off of investing in that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, that's a solution. If what you're saying is true, then an eco bond would be a really good thing to buy, and I think you should go buy it.
Me personally, or the viewers?
I'm just saying.
Everyone.
If that is your belief.
Yeah. Well, I used to tell you that I didn't think that innovation was the key, but I think that it is, if you look at history. And I've kind of been working around it and thought, a lot of my thinking of not being able to see the future is because innovation isn't something that you can see ahead. You just do it, and then it changes the course of where we're going. Nobody could have known what the world would look like 100 years ago. And so, thinking about that, looking at like the potential that people have drawn up for renewables and stuff, I think that it is definitely possible, and all it takes is the effort. And so if we put in the effort, then we'll get it. And there's so many other problems, but I think this is the one where it's become most pressing, and then people are starting to pay more attention to it. And I want there to be like an easy, access for the average person to go and be like, I want the earth to be all right. Here's like $1 or something like that, and plant a tree or something like that. Planting trees helps a lot. But yeah, so that's pretty much what I think.
The Netflix, Our Planet, very good. Highly recommended to anybody watching this.
Yeah.
It's beautifully shot. They found really interesting stuff I had never seen. I grew up with Animal Planet, and there were so many things that I saw, and I was like, I had no clue whales did that. Mm. It's crazy. You have to go watch to find out. I'm not going to spoil it. But,
okay.
Every time they would show something beautiful and amazing about our planet, and then they would just come in with, it's been reduced by 40%, and it's dropping even faster because people want to wear it as a coat, or they want to make candles out of it, or they want to rip off the tusk from this elephant, or they want to plant these oil trees or something instead of so they knock down the rainforest and
Oil
they're-
trees?
Yeah, it's these canolas, something. I forgot what
gotcha.
it was, but there's these. It's like a crop. They sell it.
Okay.
So they're knocking down the jungle and they're making money off of the land using it a different way.
Yeah.
Because at the heart of the problem, people don't want to consume less. People don't want to have less kids. In order to reduce, just people don't want to do that. So what we're trying to do in our politics is politicians, and the reason this problem is not getting solved is because the politicians, they just come up and tell us what we want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we're not going to find out, for another 10 years or 12 years until it's too late, or if it's too late right now, we don't know. I mean, when we pass that point,
Mm-hmm.
They're just coming up and they're telling us, oh, we're going to be able to consume more, we're going to be able to have more people, we're going to be able to fix these problems, everything's going to be cheap, everything's going to be great. Everybody's life is going to get perfect and awesome, and there will be no pain or struggle with solving this problem whatsoever. That's what they come up and say. They say, vote for me, and that's the future that I will give you.
Yeah.
And then Donald Trump comes up, or whoever the Republican is, and he says, oh, there is no problem. Don't even worry about it, dude. We're going to make more money. And we're all going to be rich, and just don't worry about it. So these politicians are just coming up, and at the heart of the issue is the truth that we have to consume less, or have less people, or innovate faster than we've ever innovated before in human history.
Mm-hmm.
Which we are, but not fast enough. I mean, we need to figure out these solar panels, we need to figure out energy sources, we need to figure out how we can stop doing the CO2, how can people live more efficiently while also being happier. But I mean, it's impossible questions at every corner.
Yeah.
And so it requires just a lot of talent.
Yeah.
Just raw human talent and passion to solve those problems and innovate fast enough to catch up with what everybody else in the world is going to do. Unless everybody just decides to consume less and everybody just decides to have less kids. It's not going to happen. And the politicians aren't going to do it either. It literally requires companies getting out there and finding solutions faster than anybody else. And that's my wrap up, actually. That's it.
Yeah, they're definitely. I think the heart of the problem is this or this or this. It's a bunch of hard decisions, but looking at the whole energy plan thing, it's really just a combination of every good part. We need to consume a bit less per person, and we need to think about maybe reducing population to a certain degree. Maybe you can't have 30 kids, just crazy amounts of, you can't.
We shouldn't reward people for having kids.
Fair enough.
But it's a difficult question. That's a hard
But
question
that's a hard.
to talk about.
That's weird how that's a hard thing to tell people, but at the end of the day, it's kind of true.
Well, yeah, of course it's true. I mean, because look, I got it right here. Life expectancy average of the whole Earth is 72 years. That whole Earth. That's not the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know what? Okay, finish your point. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay. So yeah, a combination of just all of those different things and time and effort. And there's the whole, there's hope for everyone, and there's a sunshine at the end of the rainbow or whatever. But it really is a lot of effort, and I think every person can do their part. I know I try and walk as much as I can and turn off the electricity when I'm not using it. But I also use a lot of hot water when I take a shower. And so it's trying to make the little sacrifices for yourself, and having that personal responsibility can have a global effect if you have that effect on other people. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. And the whole idea of researching and developing better renewable energy and whatnot.
I have two more things I want to say.
Please lay them on me.
They're not
Lay it on me.
very long. They're just little
Okay.
pop
them
shots.
off. Pop them off.
Offs. One, historically, whenever people have limited resources, that's when violence comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Resource wars is essentially every war that's ever happened. It's all about. I mean, it's all about resources. It's like you've got this tribe right here, and they've got this stuff that they're using, and then they have an increase in population, and then they say, we need more stuff, but this tribe is over here. Oh, look, we have more people, we have more fighters. Let's go, just take it. And that's always happened. And so going forward in the history, if we start running out of natural gas, or we start running out of, really anything, I can see a future. It's a pessimistic view of the future, but where wars could be fought over who is allowed to have a certain amount of CO2 or energy or resources or whatever it is. And the second pop off is push versus pull innovation. So the global GDP is 80.68 trillion US dollars. The United States, just let you know, is 18 out of that. So it's a lot. And GDP is, if you want to grow GDP, you drive up consumption. So the more people consume, the higher GDP is, the more you can tax, the more you can do. That's just how the game has been played so far. And so constantly companies are trying their hardest to increase people's consumption. So that would be what I would call a pull innovation, a push innovation, where they're pushing this product out to you, saying, look at how awesome this is. Why don't you pay for this along with everything you've been paying for in the past? Then there's a pull innovation, which is you are already pulling these resources out. You're in the supermarket. You grab an apple off the shelf, or no, let's change that for you. Let's see. What are you grabbing? You like the powdered donuts?
Sure. I'm grabbing powdered donuts.
With the white powdered donuts or the chocolate covered?
I like the chocolate ones, but I know everyone likes the white ones.
Yeah. So you grab that. When you grab that off the shelf, the next one slides forward, and then the one behind it, and it goes. That ripple effect goes. If it travels backwards all the way back to the supplier, and that means they're never making more powdered donuts than people are eating. But if you do it the other way around, where they're trying to make bigger bags and they're trying to sell more variety of products, where you're going to buy this powdered donut and the chocolate covered donut. So that's the difference between push and pull. And of all the, okay, I need to wrap it up, but there's this thing called the 7 wastes in companies where they lose most of their money, and the greatest of the 7 wastes is overproduction. Mm-hmm. And so it's constantly advocating for companies not to constantly be pushing all these different products out. But what they need to do is just listen to the customers, and they need to figure out better ways to make what people are already using. And I think if we can have that mentality throughout the whole system, where we are just only doing pull innovation, all the innovation that we do is about people consuming the same amount that they're consuming now, and us just providing that better and more efficiently.
Yeah. Well said. Well, I think that's going to wrap up this episode of the podcast. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, we're going to have our resources linked down in the description. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and share it with any of your friends that you think would be interested. And comment below on anything that you think we could improve upon or change.
Just leave a comment.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, we'll look at it.
If we have one comment, that's our favorite person.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So thanks so much for that. Thanks for watching. And anything else from you?
No.
All right. Well, that's it. Thanks, you guys.
Fantastic.